Hello there, Michelle Short here for Pinkfresh Studio. Today I'm using the Rising Wildflowers suite using a contrasting colour palette. So let's get started. This is the beautiful Rising Wildflowers suite, so there is the die and then also the coordinating stencils, and you can see on the back of the packaging how it is made to look. I am going to do it slightly differently today. So there are 5 stencils in the pack and they are numbered 1 to 5. I am actually going to start, instead of using 1, I'm going to start with stencil 3, and you'll see why a little bit later. The great thing about these stencils is that you can pretty much use them in any way you want, unless they are layering stencils, and there is 1 layer in this set, so you'd want to make sure that you did that layer after the base layers, but otherwise you can use them in any order you really want to. So I have placed my stencil down onto a panel of white cardstock, and I'm starting off with my lightest shade. I'm going to, instead of going kind of like light to dark, I'm going to go in with kind of like a little bit like a sunset or a sunrise look to these flower petals. So I'm starting off with my yellow, and this is Lemon Whip, and I'm adding this towards the top of the petals. When I get to these triangles in the stencil, I want to make sure that I cover them with the ink really well in all different types of directions with my blending brush. I'm using a 1/2 inch blending brush here to start with. And the reason you want to add ink, especially in lots of directions into those triangles, is that you're going to use those to line up the rest of the stencils and then also the die as well. So you just want to make sure that you cover all of those tiny little nooks and crannies in those triangles by going in different directions with the ink blending brush. So I'm just going through all of these petals here. I've come to another triangle there, so making sure that I fill that in really nicely. But I am just focusing this colour towards the tops of the petals. Some of the smaller petals I do end up covering quite a lot of it in the yellow, but that's absolutely fine. I then want to go in with a cloth and just remove the bulk of that ink that's still on the stencil, because I want to go in with a pink ink, which is bubblegum, and I don't want to add loads of yellow onto my pink ink blending brush, otherwise it's going to end up orange. So that's an easy way just to remove that excess ink. So now for my petals, I can go in with the bubblegum ink, and I'm adding this towards the base of the petals. And where the pink and the yellow meet, I'm going to get an orange colour. This is a really great way to kind of get that sort of sunset type look. I'm using pink rather than red, but it would work in the same kind of way. So where the 2 colours meet, you'll get that orange. Some of the petals I decided to create a little bit more of a kind of distinction between the yellow and the pink, so I didn't blend them too much. Other ones I decided to blend them quite a bit, so I got a little bit more of that orange. So it's just quite nice to change them up so that not all of the flowers look exactly the same. So again, just focusing that colour towards the base of the petals, bringing it up. And as this ink dries, it does smooth out a little bit, and it does also get a little bit lighter. So the colour that you add on to start with, or the intensity of the colour that you add on to start with, might not be the finished result. So if you're kind of happy with it at the point of adding the ink, you may then want to go in with a slightly darker shade so that it stays that colour. I decided to keep these fairly light, so I'm just going in with the 2 ink shades for these particular petals. But I could definitely have gone in with a darker pink towards the base. It just would have added a little bit more contrast onto these petals. And again, for some of these tiny little petals here, a lot of the yellow got covered up, so they ended up a little bit more orange, but that's okay. So I can just finish off with this last one here. And by the time I've got to the last one, some of the others have dried a little bit, so I can see what the intensity of the colour is going to end up looking like. So I do just go back over a few of them just to make sure that I've got that really nice dark pink there at the bottom. I can then remove that tape that's holding down the stencil. And then I can lift off that stencil, and now I've got my first layer of ink blending complete. I can then bring in the second stencil, and I'm going to line it up with those triangles. So although this is my second stencil, this is actually the stencil that's labelled 4 in the set. So for this layer, again, I'm going in with that lemon whip colour, again just towards the tops of these petals. And then this time I'm going to bring in an orange colour, which is Apricot. This is quite a nice pale orange. I did think maybe I would go in with a darker colour, but in the end I really like how this looked. So this is going to work really nicely with the other petals with the pink in, because it's going to obviously create that orange and yellow tones, but it is going to be different from the other petals. I wanted them to work really nicely together, but also there to be some contrast between the two petals so that you can see the individual petals. But you could definitely do these all in the same colour if you wanted to, you just wouldn't get so much of a contrast between them. So I'm focusing this apricot towards the base of these petals, and again some of them ended up with more orange, some of them ended up with a little bit more of a contrast between the yellow and the orange there at the bottom. And I didn't feel like I needed to clean off that stencil in between the yellow and the orange, since they're so kind of close in colour. It didn't really matter if I got yellow onto that brush. So I can just finish off here, adding a little bit more of that orange, just make sure that it's really nice and dark there towards the bottom, and then I can lift off that stencil. And I really love how they've turned out, really nice and vibrant. So for the next layer of stencils, this adds some detail onto the petals. I decided not to use it for my card and just use the smooth ink blending, but it is part of that set. So now I want to jump to stencil 1. I'm going to line that up with the 3 triangles and hold it down with some low tack tape. I can then add some ink blending on top. And for this layer, I decided to use the Detail Black Hybrid ink. And this really is why I decided to do the petals first and then do the stems. Basically, because this is such a dark colour, it is going to potentially get quite messy on the stencil, and if I accidentally go over some of the other areas, it's going to cover them up because I'm using a darker colour. If I went in with the yellows on top of the black, it's not necessarily going to look that nice. So just in case I didn't line up those stencils perfectly, I decided to do it in this particular order, but it wouldn't really matter too much in which order you did it in. So I decided to use the black for today. I do really love just having green stems and leaves, kind of like traditional. Sometimes I use blues, sometimes I use aquas, but I thought it'd be really nice today to go for a really contrasting colour palette. And so I thought it'd be quite nice to go in with the dark black for the leaves and the stems, and then have those really bright, vibrant petals. So as I add in this first layer of this ink, it is going on a little bit more of a grey colour. And it does, I suppose, end up a little bit more of a grey colour than a really nice dark black. My ink pad is a little bit on the dry side. I could definitely do with re-inking it, and that would make it a little bit darker. But actually, I do really like the finished result. And I did want there to be some lighter areas and some darker areas on these pieces as well, like I've done for the petals. So I started off with that 1/2 inch blending brush, and now I'm going in with the 1/4 inch blending brush, and I'm just going around where the edges of that stencil is, so that some of the areas are darker, and then it's going to kind of fade out a little bit to sort of a lighter black or a grey, and I do really like that look. So now I can lift off that stencil, and you can see where this is going. And now I can line up the last stencil, which is actually labelled stencil 2. And for this layer, I know that I don't want some of the stems there at the top. I wanted my card to have the flowers kind of like more towards the bottom of the card, and so I didn't want those pieces there at the top. I could definitely add the ink blending and then just cut them off, but because I'm using that black ink, I just felt like it was a little bit safer if I masked them off and didn't add that ink blending onto those pieces, so that when I go to cut them off, I'm just cutting off the white of the cardstock instead. So now I can go in with my last layer of the ink. So this again is that Detail Hybrid ink. And although this is a hybrid ink rather than a dye ink, it does really blend very nicely. So again, just going in with that 1/2 inch blending brush, and then I do go back in with that 1/4 inch blending brush just to add a little bit more darkness onto these stems. And then I can lift that off. And that is my ink blending complete. I did get a little bit of extra black ink around that stem there. Thankfully, the dye is going to cut it out, so you'll never see that. So this is the dye. I can place it over the top of my image, again lining it up with those 3 triangles. I'm then going to hold it down with some low tack tape, and I am adding a lot of tape onto this. I don't want this to accidentally move as I run it through my die cutting machine. I've spent a lot of time on that ink blending, so I want to be really careful here. So now that's all held in place, I can run that through my die cutting machine. And then I can lift off that die, just being really careful here. And then I can try and pop this out. So I found it a little bit easier to kind of pop the image kind of upwards and then have the negative going downwards, and it did just take me a little while to release all of these flowers, just being careful because some of those stems are really quite thin. And I do just also bring in my embellishment tool, and I'm using the pokey end of that to help me push all of those inside pieces out. And you can see that when this starts kind of coming together with all of those inside pieces taken out, you can see that when you add the ink blending, it does extend over the outside area of where the die cuts, so it does end up really nice and neat in the end. It doesn't necessarily look so neat as you're going along. So I then want to cut off those extra stem pieces from the tops of these flowers so that I've got a little bit more of different heights on these stems here. So just cutting off those pieces there at the top. And then I've got this one here on the right hand side, so I'm just going to cut from the top of this flower here. That is going to make it so that this is a separate piece, but that's okay. And then I can just cut off from the bottom of this flower here. So I really love how that looks. I have die cut the die another 2 times, and again I've cut those pieces off of the top and the bottom of those flowers so that I can layer these one on top of each other. I wanted some dimension on this card, but I didn't want to add lots of tiny little bits of foam tape. I thought it'd be easier for me just to die cut the die another 2 times from the white cardstock, and that's going to give me enough height to give me that dimension that I want. So I've added some liquid glue onto the back of this piece, and I can adhere that down onto my card base. And my card base is an A2 size white card base, so that's a finished size of 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. I can add some more liquid glue onto this other small piece here and pop that down towards the bottom. And I'm pretty happy with how that looks. I just happen to really like having elements on my cards sort of either towards the bottom of the card, to the side of the card, to the top of the card, rather than it cover a whole card front. But if you wanted to do that, this does look really pretty doing it that way. So I can just cut off the excess there at the bottom. I do find it a little bit easier when cutting these layers of cardstock to do them one at a time, so that I'm not trying to cut through multiple layers of cardstock. But now I can add some more liquid adhesive onto the back of these pieces and layer them on top. So I'm just taking my time here to layer them up, trying to line them up as best as possible. And then once I'm happy, I can press that down, and then again I can cut off the excess from the bottom. And now I can add some more liquid glue onto the back of the stenciled piece, and then I can layer that on top. Again, adding some more liquid glue onto this piece, and then I can pop that down. And again, just taking my time to kind of line these up. I found that it was easier maybe to get one flower in place, and then I can manipulate the other flowers to where I need them to be. Just pressing that down really nicely, and again I can cut off the excess from the bottom using some scissors. And these little pieces here that I've cut, I thought it would be really nice to cut the stems off of them like I did for the other ones, and maybe add them to the inside of the card or maybe in an envelope. I didn't do that today, but I think that that will be really pretty. So I have saved them for when I want to send out this card. I can now stamp my sentiment, and I'm using the thank you sentiment from the Heartfelt Chapters stamp set. So I've just placed that down onto some white cardstock inside my mini Misty, and then I can ink up the stamp using that same detail black hybrid ink. So just inking up that stamp, and then I can stamp that down. And I do end up stamping this, I think 3 times, just to make sure that I get a really nice dark impression of that ink. I can then take the Heartfelt Chapters die set and place the die on top of my sentiment, hold that down with some low tack tape and run that through my die cutting machine. And then I did cut this again another 2 times like I did for the flowers, just so that I can layer them one on top of each other to give me that dimension. I could definitely add this with foam tape, but I wasn't sure exactly how much it was going to overlap the flowers, and so I thought it'd be easier just to add the layers of the cardstock. So again, just lining those up as best as possible, and then I can add some more liquid adhesive onto the back of that and adhere that down onto the card, just using my T-square ruler there to make sure that I place it down straight. And then to finish off, I'm adding some iridescent dewdrops. And what I love about this set of dewdrops is that some of them have got like different iridescence to them. So I picked the ones that have like an orange iridescence so that they would go really nicely with the petals. So some of them in that pack are blue, some of them are more purple, some of them are more pink, and then these ones here are more orange. So I really love that pack. It's really versatile for lots of different cards. And so that is the card finished for today. I really love the contrasting colour scheme with the black leaves and stems and then those bright petals. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.